I was thinking about where to start my remarks today. I fell on framing them in through a thought that I often share with my students and even with my kids when they're trying to get everything that they want. And that is that when it comes to the Global Fragility Act MEL plan, as with many things in our personal professional lives, there is no perfect answer. There's only trade-offs. Another way of putting this is that it's impossible for the MEL plan to be all things for all people. Although it would also be extremely ill-advised to have it seek to be all things to only one group of people. If the plan is designed and implemented in such a way that it fails to grapple with the various trade-offs, or that it brushes under the rug the fact that there are trade-offs, it will fail to deliver what it intends. Now, on the positive side, I do believe from my experience that it's possible to design a MEL plan that is expressly built to balance the different trade-offs and tensions when embarking on such a complex challenge as that posed by the Global Fragility Act, and that you are all involved in grappling with at this very moment. I don't have to tell you how complex this is. My policy brief is centered on how you might approach bringing these trade-offs to light, grappling with them, seeking to balance them as you design a MEL approach for the Global Fragility Act. The proposed framework in the brief encourages the consideration of strategies and structures implicated by the endeavor, the environments in which it will operate, and that can include organizational and cultural, the people with a vested interest and a hand in implementing it, the tools and technology that will be leveraged to move the endeavor forward, and the processes through which it will occur. And most importantly, all of these aspects are interconnected. They play off of each other. And it's the way in which these intersect with each other that we should consider our approaches. As I stated in the brief, the challenge isn't so much that there aren't indicators to choose from, but the question is what makes one indicator more important than another. I could sit from this very chair. This is my new office in South Bend for the time being. And I could pick what I think are important indicators based on my own background and experience, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're important to other people in all contexts. And so point number one is that the determination of what is important to measure cannot be made by a handful of people from behind a desk in Washington, even though all of your insights and perspectives are important and well-informed. There has to be a process. And I would argue that the indicators that are important are the ones that will generate data that can inform needed decisions to ensure effectiveness and that can balance the needs of different stakeholders. With our limited time today, rather than rehash the points in my brief more than I just have, you all have that brief and you can refer to it at your own time. I wanted to add a little more flavor and context to what I put in that brief, as well as share my own experience on what this can look like in a challenge as complex as the Global Fragility Act. It's my belief that we should be seeking to find the sweet spot between hand-wringing on one extreme and over-hasty action on the other. So what I'm going to share with you today is born out of a laboratory of personal experience. My career has spanned global development, humanitarian work in government organizations. I worked for a US government agency. Non-governmental organizations. I worked for Catholic Relief Services, where I was the Global Director of Monitoring, Evaluation, Accountability, and Learning, and now in my current role with academic institutions. My current role also affords me the challenge and privilege of seeking common solutions with a large number of partners in organizations such as the ones that I've already mentioned, including to add the private sector. And much of what I'm sharing with you in the policy brief and today was incubated as I led the development and implementation of a global monitoring, evaluation, accountability, and learning strategy at Catholic Relief Services that was intended to span all sectors of operation for the agency and spanning the nearly 100 countries of operation. So I wanted to highlight one initiative that was thrown at our feet, a challenge that was thrown at our feet by the board of the organization, through which the ideas in the policy brief came to light. We deliberately used them to help us plan and implement this activity. And that was to create a set of MEAL policy, MEAL or MEL, we use the acronym MEAL there, policies and procedures that would cut across all programs in a meaningful way, and to roll this out agency-wide. Now, the last thing that people in the field want are another set of policies and procedures, and I was mindful of that from the beginning. So in accepting this challenge and building this out over a number of years and across geographies, I first learned that it's important to reflect upon the many roles that a MEL plan will be called upon to play. In our case here with the Global Fragility Act, I suspect that the plan will almost certainly be asked to serve the functions of 1, reporting to Congress, 2, monitoring and evaluating the global strategy as posited within the language of the Global Fragility Act itself, 3, monitoring and evaluating each country's strategy, informing the management and adaptation of in-country and community-based activities implicated by the Global Fragility Act, and advocating for change with decision makers in Washington, even advocating for peace and change for key actors in fragile states, providing learning for other projects and contexts, and last but not least, communicating with citizens of fragile states. These all, to the untrained outside eye, look like the same thing, but the reality is, and what we learned as we were implementing our own strategy, is that they have unique demands and requirements that often compete with those of other roles. I wanted to close just by stating that in seeking to balance the needs of many stakeholders for our own project at Catholic Relief Services, the board, the executive leadership, the regional offices, the country programs, the organization staff, I was almost overwhelmed by the tensions introduced while trying to understand and meet everyone's needs. For example, when we found ourselves catering too much to the needs of headquarters, we often lost the goodwill and cooperation of people on the ground. The community and partner staff couldn't have cared any less about reporting to the board. And our own staff even found the reporting upwards burdensome and distracting. So I learned quickly that not all requests were equal in terms of feasibility or desirability when considering the full intended functionality of MEL data. I learned to implicitly triage different requests to ones that were manageable within existing resources, those that were manageable with existing resources but would impact and require work from others. And I'm mindful that you can't just ask others to do all the work for you. Those that would require additional time, those that would require additional resources in order to do effectively, and those that were unreasonable at any cost. And I learned how to communicate to the different stakeholders, especially the board, in terms of opportunity costs. Okay, we could do this, but this is what it would take for us to do that. And this is what it would require from other people. Are you okay with that? And so using this lens of the lens posited in my policy brief, I wanted to underscore with you that using the STEP framework in the way it is intended and requires participation, it requires thought, and it requires time, and it cannot be done entirely solely by a team behind a desk in Washington. And so I look forward to ongoing conversation about the different questions you might have about the different components, but all this to say that we've applied this in a real world setting. It brought richness to our efforts. It brought the ability to balance different stakeholders, and it was a very iterative process for us. Thank you.